Well, every Thomascember we try to look at the best the island of Sodor has to offer. With one exception. Okay, maybe two if you want to get technical. That doesn't count, that wasn't even released yet. But this year we're going to take the other track. No pun intended.
This year, as well as looking at Series 20 and Journey Beyond Sodor, we're also going to take a look at Series 8 to 12. Oh boy, I didn't imagine that coming out of my mouth. This is what many people claim to be the downfall of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, and they're right.
For quite a few years now I've had some fans asking me my thoughts on Series 8 to 12, and by God I didn't want to look at them again.
But admittedly, I did watch a couple of episodes from Series 8 out of boredom and found that some of them weren't as bad as I remember them to be. Of course, they're not great, especially when you compare them to the classic series, but they're not that bad either. It's really a mixture of some good episodes and a lot of bad episodes. So I thought I'd just have a quick look at them and see what they're like now compared to how I first saw them. And the results were somewhat surprising.
There's a lot of seasons to cover and a lot of suffering to be had. So let's begin Thomascember in Series 8 to 12, Series 20 and Journey Beyond Sodor. I hope you guys appreciate what I'm going to do for you.
Okay, so let's go back to where this all started. Hit Entertainment acquired the rights to Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends prior to the screening of the 6th series and filming of the 7th, when Britt Allcroft and David Mitton still had control over the show. Then once HIT finally had control of the show, they gave the show a massive overhaul. The stories were lengthened into 7 minutes, and the interactive statements were installed to allow the younger audiences to interact with Thomas and his friends. Britt Allcroft, David Mitton, Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell retired from the show, and Steve Asquith stepped up as the director for the series. And the music from this series onwards was done by Robert Harshorn and Ed Welch, which isn't terrible, it's just not as good as Mike and Junior's music. And of course Michael Angelis continued to narrate for the show in the UK, and Michael Brandon continued to narrate for it in the US. And it also started when I first saw an advert for it on TV while I was watching Cartoon Network at the time. It was advertising a new Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends VHS tape and DVD, which indicated that there were going to be new episodes for Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends.
Holy crap, when I was a kid I was beyond excited about this. Thomas the Tank Engine had been airing on CITV in the early 2000s, and besides Series 5 and Series 6 and Series 7, we never got any other new episodes.
When I was a kid I was really excited, because since Series 7 we haven't had any new episodes on CITV. Because back then, after Series 7 aired, it was just reruns of Series 7 and Series 6. So I was beyond excited to see there was going to be more episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine on TV. When I first saw it, I was in denial and tried to convince myself that these were good episodes. But then after rewatching them again after a while, I started to see this for what it was. It was just HIT Entertainment trying to cash in on a popular franchise, which they had done before, but not usually with a franchise they hadn't owned in the past.
So yeah, the hype died down really quick, but I was still kind of interested to watch the episodes. I mean, after all, it was part of my childhood, and I really wanted to see some of the new adventures Thomas and his friends were going to have.
Some would say that this series had good intentions, but it was really just HIT trying to take Thomas and making their own. And they changed so much in the show that it's really hard to see it as the classic series that we grew up with. Of course, the kids from today's generation at that time would have loved it, but for the classic series fans, it was a huge downgrade. A lot of things changed for this series, including the direction, the music, the writers, the camera work, the use of CGI elements, and even the models. And some of the characters had changed too. While Thomas was still the main character that he was in the original series, and James was still the arrogant, dishonest jerk that he was in the classic series, and Gordon was still the stuck-up fool, other characters were changed a lot. Like Edward, for example. Edward is a prime example of the worst elements of this series. His character has taken a turn for the worse since then. In the classic series, he was the wisest engine on the railway team and performed any task with little difficulty. But from Series 8 onwards, he was just a weakling who was very weak and feeble and always had to prove himself. And it was very rare in this series that we actually saw him with an expression that wasn't pathetic. So everybody just went off the rails when this happened. Again, no pun intended. Another huge character change in this series was Emily, who was recently introduced to the show in Series 7. When she was first introduced in Series 7, Emily was a kind engine who would have no ill word said about anyone. Examples were proven in Salty Stormy Tale, but here they just reintroduced her as a complete bitch. I mean, almost every scene she's in, she's always being rude to another engine, and that's just so out of character for her. Much like how out of character Diesel 10 was in calling all engines.
Now, having Emily be this kind of character in Series 8 onwards doesn't work, because that's not the type of character she was when she was introduced in Series 7. So just having her be like this out of the blue is just really confusing, it makes no sense.
Maybe if they were to introduce a new character, then this would have been fitting. But because we know Emily from Series 7, this is so unfitting. On top of that, there's many episodes that seem to contradict earlier episodes. Like having Thomas learn not to rush multiple times, and just some lessons being learnt by other engines that Thomas had already learnt. I mean, it's like the writers were out of ideas or something. Almost like how The Simpsons is at the moment. Oh yeah, I went there. Also, no new characters were introduced in this series since the team wanted to focus on the 8 main engines. Yeah, Emily's a main character in the series now. Also, around this time and the recording of the 7th series, Michelangelo was getting on in those days, and it really shows. He could no longer give off that massive energy he was able to give in the classic series, from series 3 to 6. And every time you hear James and Percy talking in this series, it just sounds like they're shouting every syllable that comes out of their mouths.
You're lucky, James Huff. I have to do the Black Lock run. Big Blue show off. Puff Percy.
Years later, and I still don't understand why Michelangelo had to make Percy and James sound like they were always shouting every syllable that came out of their goddamn mouths.
But aside from all that, there are some decent episodes, or good episodes, but not exactly top-notch. Like, admittedly, I thought Halloween was a kind of funny episode, because I think it's funny to see Ari and Bert play tricks on Thomas and Emily, even though that's not the characters they were in Series 5. But it's quite a funny episode, and it's really hilarious to see the Fat Controller in his pyjamas. Fish was quite entertaining, even though it copies the title from a Series 4 episode. So I think it's quite nice to see Thomas working with Fish, even though he hates Fish. Spick and Span was admittedly another funny episode. Like the ending bit with Gordon, James and Emily is kinda laugh out loud. And Gordon Takes Charge is quite entertaining because it's so nice to see Gordon being the pompous character that he is. And it's really great to see him get his comeuppance at the end. And even though I don't like Emily's new character from Series 8 onwards, I do admittedly like Emily's new route, because that's one of the few times where she's not a complete bitch to anyone else. And Thomas Saves the Day was quite an enjoyable episode, especially with that great chase scene and the music that they did for it. And I do have a soft spot for Don't Tell Thomas, because I quite like the idea that they have a surprise for the main character, but them not telling him anything makes him feel left out. I guess I'm just used to that plot because I've seen it loads of times in other specials.
So yeah, this was the definite downfall for Thomas the Tank Engine and friends, but it's not gone awful, especially when you compare it to the Sharon Miller era.
So while Series 8 is a bad series, it does have some decent episodes. So if you could find some good episodes in Series 8, then I would recommend watching them and just skipping all the bad episodes. But if it's not to your taste, then I'd skip it myself. And this was only the beginning of the bad seasons of Thomas the Tank Engine, and there was more suffering to come.
And may God have mercy on us all.
The 9th series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends was broadcast in 2005. It was narrated by Michelangelo in the UK and Michael Brandon in the US. Like most of the other series, it ran for 26 episodes.
So what's Series 9 like compared to Series 8? Well, they brought back the narrow gauge engines and started introducing new characters, so that has to be a good thing, right? Right?
That's right, this series brought the return of the narrow gauge engines. Well, almost all the narrow gauge engines. A lot of them were missing from the series, including Sir Handel and Duke. And it's kind of hard to have missed them at this point because they had changed so much in terms of character and locations. And since Series 5 they've been using larger scale models for the characters because it was hard for them to work with the small models from the 4th series. And their stories are somewhat okay, but most of them are repetitive from previous stories, and I honestly haven't missed them that much in this series because they changed too much.
By this point, the narrow gauge engines were definitely out of character. aside from Duncan.
The only character that I can safely say that does remain himself is Duncan, because he was always the impatient and bad-tempered narrow gauge engine of the series, and he still is in this series. Despite the fact that he's kind of stupid and has to learn his lessons countless times. But besides that, he's still the same old Duncan that he was before. The 9th series also brought in the controller for the narrow gauge railway named Mr. Percival, also known as the Fin Controller, a character who was in the Railway series but wasn't introduced in the TV series when the narrow gauge engines were introduced. So having Mr. Percival in is a nice change, instead of having the Fat Controller be the unquestionable God, Lord and Master of the Sodor Railway. It's just really nice to have a controller for the narrow gauge railway who isn't the Fat Controller. The series also brought in many different new characters, including Molly, Neville, Dennis and Mighty Mac. And out of all the new characters in this series, I can honestly say that Mighty Mac is the most interesting of these characters, since it's a double-headed locomotive from the narrow gauge railway. And this is the type of engine that I rode on in Wales many years ago when I was a kid, and it's really interesting and new to see this kind of engine in the TV series. And they're really your basic twins who get into arguments about which way they're going to go, and they always get into trouble for it since they're both the same engine and they can't decide which way they should go. And what's also interesting about him is Mighty has hair on him, and not many engines actually have hair on them. So Mighty was the first, while Mac doesn't have any hair at all. Molly is another interesting character in the 9th series because of her personality that she showed in her only episode where she gets a big screen appearance. She has a peacekeeper attitude, tends to be rather sensible, and is looked upon as the big sister of some of the engines. However, because of her sensitivity, she can be easily embarrassed or upset by conflict. And that's a really nice character trope for Molly. It's just a shame that she didn't get as much screen time as she should have. Neville was another character that was quite interesting, but didn't really get much personality development in his one episode, despite the fact that some of the engines confuse him for a diesel engine just because of the way he looks.
I hear you're a racist now. How did you get interested in that type of thing? Should we all be racist now?
And that is quite interesting, but they didn't really give him enough screen time to fully develop his personality. Dennis is also another character that was introduced to this series, and he was pretty much just a lazy little bastard who wanted others to do his jobs for him because he was too lazy to do it himself. Which did make for one of the funnier episodes of the series, but like Neville, he didn't really get much time to develop a personality besides the fact that he's lazy and trying to learn to not be lazy. There was a huge opportunity to have episodes with him where he's learning not to be so lazy, but because entertainment had this tendency to introduce some new characters and then not focus on them again afterwards, we get one of these characters like Dennis who was given a quite interesting backstory and character development, but didn't have enough episodes to develop him as a character.
The episodes they had for the new characters were interesting, but it's just a shame that they never gave them more time to develop in further episodes. Because these characters had the potential to be good characters, aside from just toys on the shelf.
And upon doing research for this series, I found out quite surprisingly that Sharon Miller, the head writer of series 13 to 16, started off writing for Thomas in this series.
May God have mercy on us all.
And as you could well imagine, all the stories that she wrote for are very repetitive and contradict previous episodes, with the whole 3 strikes you're out bullshit. But like Series 8, there are some episodes that are pretty decent. Like Molly's Special is one of my favourite episodes because it looks at Molly, one of my favourite new series characters who should have been given more time to develop a personality. But this one does define her as a character, and it's really a shame that she doesn't get seen in the show more often. Mighty Mac was pretty hilarious because of the character Mighty Mac and how they have a problem deciding which way to go. Respect for Gordon shows Gordon as the big pompous buffoon that he is in the show, and it's a nice change to see Gordon get into trouble but not be told off by the Fat Controller. The lack of the scolding in this episode is quite a nice change from the previous episodes. Emily Knows Best isn't one of the best episodes of this series, but I do have to admit, she does get a little chuckle out of me in this episode every now and then. Thomas's Day Off, an episode that was actually written by Sharon Miller, is one of the episodes from her that doesn't suck. And it gives a good personality for Dennis, and it's just a shame that he didn't get as much time to develop a personality. Duncan and the Old Mine is an entertaining episode because it's another one that focuses on Duncan, and the Duncan episodes rarely disappoint me. And admittedly, I do find Flower Power kind of funny, because it's really nice to show Thomas doing a ghostly trick on Diesel after his piss taking. even though Diesel really should have been sent packing countless times, even though they led him back onto the railway, I don't know how many times. But it's the Fat Controller's railway, and let's be honest, he's sort of lost it over the years, I reckon. But it does make for an entertaining Halloween episode, nonetheless.
So Series 9 is an improvement over Series 8, but it's still pretty bad, especially when you compare it to the classic episodes. So an improvement over Series 8, but pretty bad.
So even though Series 9 isn't exactly top-notch like the classic series, it is a definite improvement over Series 8. With more better stories, some character development from the new characters, and the return of the narrow gauge engines. So if you can find some good episodes in this series, then I'd definitely check them out and skip the bad ones. But like Series 8, if it's not to your taste, then skip it and just go to the classic episodes and the Andrew Brenner era. In 2006, the 10th series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends was broadcast. This series had 28 episodes instead of 26 and was narrated by Michael Angelis in the UK and Michael Brandon in the US.
So how is Series 10 compared to Series 8 and 9? Like Series 9, it is an improvement, but not enough to fix the broken tracks.
Like Series 9, it's full of some decent episodes and a lot of bad episodes. But like with my previous reviews, let's go through the bads before I go through the goods. If you thought Edward being a weakling from Series 8 onwards was bad, take a look at what they did to him in the episode Edward Strikes Out. Edward calls Rocky a new crane newfangled nonsense when he arrives. Now this is completely out of character for Edward because he's not the kind of engine who would say this kind of rude thing to anyone else. And I've heard a lot of people complain about Edward being a weakling from Series 8 onwards, but strangely I never hear that many people complain about how he was in Edward Strikes Out. Well, this makes no sense since he was never like that to any other characters in the classic series. Okay, unless you count Harvey and Emily's introductions in Series 8 and 7, but that was kind of different. Another really bad thing is from the episode It's Good to Be Gordon, where Gordon accidentally takes Henry's special coal to make him go faster, leaving Henry to break down. Now this makes no sense because Henry's special coal fin was originally gotten rid of in the episode Flying Kipper. In the first series of Thomas, Henry had to use Welsh coal because of his small firebots. Then after he was rebuilt at Crewe, he got a larger firebot so he didn't need special coal anymore. But this episode just throws all that out the window and gives Henry special coal again. Now this makes no sense because he's been using regular coal for ages and nothing's ever gone wrong with him. So now they're saying in this episode that if he takes regular coal again, he just gets all fucked up? That's complete bullshit. Now that's all the bad stuff out of the way, let's talk about the new characters. One new character is Rocky the New Crane, who likes to lift heavy objects such as engines, coaches and trucks. He is a friendly and careful crane who helps the engines when there is an accident. He takes pride in his work and is always happy to help. Now a lot of people claim that he was the replacement for the breakdown train and Harvey the crane engine since he was stronger than Harvey. Now I personally don't think that's true in Harvey's case, but in the case of the breakdown train it is true because we don't get to see the breakdown train again until the adventure begins and Series 20. So yeah, Rocky was the basic replacement for the breakdown train for a while. There's also Freddy, the warehouse engine of the Skarloey Railway. In his youth he was known as Fearless Freddy and was the daredevil of the hills, known for being fast, fun and of course fearless. As a result of having worked on the narrow gauge line many years before, Freddy knows the route as well as many hidden tracks, like the back of his buffers, and can use them to his advantage. Although he is now a much older engine, Freddy is still full of boyish charm, has his wits about him, and is always game for a competition. He is chucklesome, will never forget a friend, and is still very much capable of giving the other engines a run for their money. In this introduction episode, he was shown as being known as Fearless Freddy, but still had some fear in him. And this is really just like the whole liar reveal story that we've seen loads of times before. And again, Freddy is an interesting character. It's just a shame that we never got to see him again after Series 12. There's also Jeremy, a jet plane who lives at the Sodor airport. Now he's one of those characters that I'm not completely fond of because he just looks a little too modern for the Thomas universe for me. I don't know if it's just me, but he just looks kind of modern. But all the same, he is quite an interesting character and it's nice to see another air vehicle besides Howard the Helicopter and Tiger Moth in the show. And like Freddy, it's a huge shame that he never got to be in the show more often. And for me, the highlight character of this series is Rosie, the little purple engine.
Well, obviously.
As you may have guessed by now, Rosie is one of my favourite characters from the new series of Thomas the Tank Engine. And the episode she was in Series 10 really got some time to develop her personality.
She's a friendly, respectful and helpful tank engine who likes Thomas very much. She and Thomas like to have fun, and also like to help each other when they are working. Rosie could be described as a feisty, energetic and free-spirited tomboy who is not afraid of hard work. Her first episode is sort of the fangirl thing where she has a huge liking for Thomas and wants to be just like him. And of course this was the main inspiration for me making Rosie a main character in my Thomas series, as well as making her the girlfriend of Thomas. And she's a character that I'm honestly glad to be part of the series because she's one of my favourite new Railway series characters. As in Railway series I mean the TV series, not the actual Railway series. The series also brought in the return of Sodor, a narrow gauge engine who had been around since Series 4, but then was absent from Series 5 onwards.
Despite the fact that bringing Sodor back was a good move for his entertainment, again, he was quite out of character compared to how he was in Series 4, much like all the other narrow gauge engines except for Duncan.
I mean, in the original series, he was always this grumpy engine who was quite nice really, but could get grumpy very easily. In this series, he has no grumpy traces about him. Just this old engine who starts bumping about every time he does a hard job going up hills. So not exactly the Sodor I remember, but it's still great to see him again after all these years. And we also get a cool cameo from the Chinese dragon from Thomas Percy and the Dragon. And if I had to pick some favourite episodes from this series, I'd say that one would definitely have to be the Green Controller, where Percy's put in charge of the engines for the fat controller who has lost his voice. But Percy only causes confusion, giving engines the wrong jobs, and making James get a hilarious bee-like paint job. For me, the highlight of this episode is just getting to see James painted like a bee, especially when you know his incident with bees in Buzz Buzz. Peace and Wharf is another episode that I kinda have a soft spot for, because it focuses on Skarloey. And I usually enjoy the episodes with the narrow gauge engines. Emily and the Special Coaches is another favourite, because it shows Gordon getting new coaches but Diesel stealing them from Emily. I just find it really hilarious to see Emily chasing Diesel around the island for hours on end. And the ending is quite sweet even for Diesel's character. Thomas and Skarloey's Big Day Out is one of those episodes that I don't think is exactly top notch, but I do have a soft spot for it because we get to see the original Series 4 Skarloey model again. And I thought that was a really nice touch for this episode, bringing in the original Skarloey model in with the large-scale Thomas model. James' Second Best is quite a funny episode because I can't get enough of James running into that billboard of Edward. It just looks so hilarious to me. But for me, my all-time favourite episode of this series is Thomas and the Birthday Mail. Surprised? Because it's a great introduction to Rosie, one of my favourite new series characters.
So like the past two series, there are some decent and okay episodes in Series 10, but it's mostly filled with pretty bad ones.
But like the past series, there's also some good episodes to keep you entertained if you're into this kind of thing. So I would say find the good episodes and look to those and then just skip the other bad episodes. But I'm sure you'll get a kick out of the new characters and Rosie's introduction. Thomas and Friends Series 11 aired in 2007, was narrated by Michael Angelis in the UK and Michael Brandon in the US. The most interesting thing about this series is that after most of the episodes aired, a DVD titled Engines and Escapades was released, bringing the total number of episodes of this series to 26.
So what's Series 11 like compared to the past three series of Thomas and Friends? Again, an improvement over the first three series, but not exactly great.
Yeah, like the previous series, there's lots of bad episodes in this and very few good episodes. But they do have somewhat interesting new characters in the series. Like Whiff the Rubbish Engine, who is cheerful and optimistic and enjoys his job of collecting rubbish. He either doesn't seem to care what other engines think about him or is oblivious to their opinions. Sort of like Pepe Le Pew and Fifi Le Fume in Looney Tunes and Tiny Toon Adventures. Despite that, he is very friendly and takes an immediate liking to Emily. And of course he's the first engine on the island to have glasses. How weird is that? There's Billy, a bright orange tank engine who could be impatient and impulsive. Although he is bumbling with enthusiasm and keen to get stuck in, he tends to act before he thinks, which is why people gave him the nickname Silly Billy. And a lot of fans see him as the original Charlie, since both engines are the same model. But unlike Charlie, who was annoying, Billy had the potential to become a better character and learn not to be so silly or impatient. But they just used him in one episode and then we never saw him again afterwards, which made him another pointless character on the cameo shelf. There's Hector the truck, who used to be mean and aggressive to hide his fear of being filled with coal. But thanks to Thomas, he learned that there's no need to be scared and is now friendly and helpful to the engines.
I find it quite interesting how they introduced a truck that wasn't troublesome like the other troublesome trucks and had a fierce appearance to him but was quite soft on the inside. It's just a shame that they didn't give him more episodes to develop his personality after that.
Which is a real shame because I find him to be one of the most interesting trucks on the island. A truck who seems to be aggressive on the outside but is actually really kind on the inside. I just think that's really interesting. And it's a real shame that they never saw him again for the rest of the series. And I know you think I'm going to be crazy for saying this, but I actually think that Michael Brandon's Hector voice is better than Michelangelo's.
What is wrong with you?
Mostly with the roaring keep away bit. Just listen to these two side by side.
Keep away! Keep away!
Now obviously because Michelangelos was aging at the time, he didn't have that much energy. So he just really sounded like some old guy trying to be scary but not really succeeding. Now Michael Brandon on the other hand, because he was younger, he had a lot more energy so he could put more oomph in the voice when he was shouting. So this was one of the few times Michael Brandon did a good job in the series. And the last new character of this series is Madge, a snub-nosed lorry with a three-wheeled cab and flatbed. She works alongside the Scarlowry Railway. What she lacks in elegance, she makes up for it in strength and personality. She acts as a motherly figure to the narrow gauge engines, but can be playful and loves a good joke. Again, she had the potential to be another great character to the series, but like most of the other characters that were introduced in these times, she was just shown in one episode and then was never seen again afterwards. Okay, yeah, she did have one cameo in The Great Discovery, but that's it. Like most of the other characters introduced to this series, we never saw her again. Like I said before, some episodes from Series 6 were aired on DVD exclusively, and never aired on TV until 2008, and these episodes would be 6 narrow gauge engine stories. And they're pretty repetitive to previous episodes, even though it is nice to see the narrow gauge engines, but it's just quite repetitive to other stories that were seen before. And there are also some episodes that steal titles from previous episodes in the classic series, like Thomas in Trouble, where Thomas leaves the fitters yard to pick up a chore before he is completely repaired. This one just steals the title from a Series 1 episode where Thomas gets in trouble with a policeman. And there's also Dirty Work, where James gets ready to be the star of a show, but it just steals the title from a Series 2 episode with Duck and Diesel. A pretty good episode, but did they really have to steal the title from an existing episode with this title? The series also brought the return of Donald and Douglas after so many years in Gordon and the Engineer. It is great to see them in this series, but we wouldn't see them properly again for many years later on. We also got a short cameo from Molly in this series, a character who was introduced in Series 9 and was never really seen much again afterwards. So even though Hit didn't use her in future episodes, it was nice to see her again after so long.
It's obvious that most of the classic characters were being brought back for this series because they wanted to pander to the classic fans of the show.
And as for favourite episodes, some of mine would have to be Emily's Rubbish, where Emily is teased for working with Whiff, but soon learns how useful Whiff is. It's quite a lovely Emily episode where she's not a complete bitch to other engines, and it's quite funny how she keeps asking the other engines for help with the rubbish trucks.
Can you help me move these rubbish trucks? Tooted Emily. Me? Snorted Gordon. Certainly not.
I especially love James's reaction, it's just so friggin' hilarious.
Can you help me move these rubbish trucks, James? Peeped Emily. No, thank you. Wheeze James.
Dirty Work is another good episode, but again, did they really have to steal the title from a Series 2 episode?
Idiots!
Hector the Horrid was another interesting episode because it shows a very interesting truck who seems aggressive but is actually friendly. Thomas Sets Sail is another quite funny episode because it's quite hilarious for me to see Thomas going out of control with a sailboat, and it's really nice to have Rosie have a cameo in this one. I'm a sucker for the Rosie moments. Thomas and the runaway car is another funny episode because the runaway car causes trouble for Thomas, and it's quite hilarious to see Rosie getting splattered with mud.
Even though she didn't get any major appearances like in Series 10, it was nice to see Rosie implemented into the story every now and then.
Thomas and the Stinky Cheese was another entertaining episode because it shows Thomas trying to avoid Diesel, Ari and Bert while taking some stinky cheese. And another piece of trivia for you is that this episode was originally going to be the test model for the full CGI series of Thomas the Tank Engine, but then they scrapped the idea for unknown reasons.
The Series 11 is a good enough series, but not exactly great when you compare it to the classic series. And this is getting quite repetitive, isn't it?
So Series 11 is an improvement from the past series, but it's still pretty half-assed when you compare it to the classic series episodes. And like the previous seasons, I'd say go for the good episodes and skip all the bad episodes, or if they're not to your taste, just go to the classic series in the Andrew Brenner era. But I guarantee you'll enjoy some of the episodes that I've listed, as they're quite entertaining and funny as well. And now we come to the final series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends to use the original models, Series 12. With 20 episodes narrated by Michael Angelis in the UK and Michael Brandon in the US, although Pierce Brosnan was originally going to narrate this series in the UK and the US. Wow, he did such a great job in The Great Discovery that he was actually going to carry on for the series. How cool would that have been? As well as being the last series to use the models, it was also the first series to use full CG elements, mostly with the people and the faces on the engines.
No, thank you.
So how did this idea work out? Man, it was a stupid idea.
Yeah, it's pretty half-assed when you look at it years later. But again, it has some interesting characters that we sadly never got to see again. Like Hank the American Engine, who may come across as brash in his cheery confidence and enthusiasm, but being the mighty titan he is, Hank is more than used to being easily seen or heard. Like most of the other characters, he had the potential to be a great character in the series. But sadly, he was just seen in one episode and then never seen or heard of again. And I find it a damn shame, because he was the first American engine on the island to have an American accent. And I say the first American engine to have an American accent because Rosie's based off of an American engine, but she has a British accent. So this makes Hank the first actual American engine on the island. Well, okay, unless you count Smudger from Series 4, but still. There's Flora, the little steam tram, who mainly works in the Great Waterton tramway with her tram car, which is her pride and joy, that she uses to perform passenger duties. Although she is at times quiet or even timid, she often greets other engines with a sunny smile. She is always cheerful to work, but she can be concerned about speaking up right away if there is a problem. And I really like this character's design. It's just a great looking tram, which makes her different from Toby. She's almost like one of those trams that you'd see at places like the Seaton Tramway. And it would have been really nice to have seen her in the future, because it would have been nice to have seen more tram engines on the island of Sodor. But like Hank, she was only seen in one episode and then never seen or heard of again afterwards, which is a damn shame. And the last new character to be introduced in this series was Colin, a chipper, cheerful canal-side crane who works at the wharf for the narrow gauge railway. While he isn't the largest crane or the strongest, Colin's determination and skill make him fast and efficient. He prides himself on always knowing the right lifting speed for the right load. And besides all that, there's not really much to his personality, just the fact that he's friendly and loves to work and knows how to lift the right loads. Unlike the other characters in this series, he was only introduced in one episode and then never seen or heard of again. Which is a damn shame, because like the other characters, they could have totally spent more time developing his personality. This series also saw the return of several other classic characters, like you got to see Oliver, Arthur, Duck, Donald and Douglas, Bill and Ben, and many others from the classic series in this series. But it's really just pandering to the classic fans who watched it from day one.
Again, Hit was trying to pander to the fans of the classic series with the reintroductions of classic characters like Duck, Oliver, Toad, Bill, Ben, Donald and Douglas, and so on and so forth.
So it's great to see them again, but it's obviously pandering to the fan service. And there's many episodes that just contradict earlier episodes, like the whole Three Strikes You're Out bullshit that Sharon Miller keeps putting in. And for me, one of the worst episodes is Best Friends, because it has Thomas and Percy tested in their friendship. But their friendship has been tested so many times in the classic series that this just feels repetitive. And yeah, let's talk about the CGI in this series. When I first heard about the CGI animation for the first time, I was quite shocked that Hit Entertainment would do this to my childhood favourite. And they did try and experiment with it by having the models have the CGI faces, but it just doesn't work, even today.
I mean, when you look at the CG on the engines and all the people, it just looks so unrealistic when you put them with the models.
I mean, when you look at the faces on the engines and the people that are CG, then you can tell that they're not really there. Especially in those sunset and nighttime scenes, they just look so fake. They would have honestly just been better off either going full CG with this series or just not going CG at all. And this was also the first time the engines got to speak for themselves without relying on the narrator to say their lines for them. But it was all done by the one person, and this was the last series that Michael Brandon and Michelangelos would contribute their voices for every single character. And in Michelangelos' case, it was honestly a good thing because he was getting on at the time and he couldn't do that great energy and the voices that he could do in the past. And this would later be upstaged in Series 13 where they introduced individual actors for the characters. So outside of Series 13 to 16, this is one of my least favourite series in the show. Not just because of the CG elements, but because of the uninteresting stories. Well, besides Rosie's Funfair special, because that's an episode that's based on Rosie. And up until Series 21, this would be the first episode of Rosie where she gets full screen time to herself, ever since she was introduced in Series 10. And this episode has a great cameo from Stepney, who we hadn't seen for years, and it was just great to see him again after so long. It's just a damn shame that we never see him again in the future series.
I'll admit it was nice to have Rosie get a major appearance in Series 10, since all the other appearances she had were cameos and just one-off speaking roles in episodes. So it's nice to have her get a main role again.
So aside from Rosie's Funfair special, which I really enjoyed, the rest of the episodes are just quite dull in my opinion. So Series 12 for me is the weakest of the pre-CG series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. And for a send-off series for the model series, then I honestly think this is just really weak and not handled very well.
So Series 12 had some okay episodes, mostly pretty bad episodes, and a really bad experiment that didn't work very well, which was why they moved on to full CG afterwards.
So yeah, despite having one good episode in this series, this was definitely a weak send-off for the original models. I honestly think that Series 11 would have been a better send-off for the models, as well as the Great Discovery. But that's it for the crap stuff for Thomas the Tank Engine this Thomascember. Next time we'll be moving on to some good stuff. As Rocket J. Squirrel would say. And now here's something I hope you'll really like. The 20th series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, narrated by Mark Morgan in the UK and the US versions.
So after going through some really bad seasons of the show, how is Series 20? It's definite proof that Andrew Brenner is the right person to handle Thomas the Tank Engine.
Because it has interesting stories and entertaining stories, great new characters and great reintroductions to classic characters. The new characters include Hugo, a gentle rail zeppelin. He is a kind and gentle engine. He loves to be useful, but is also a bit sensitive. This is shown when his feelings are hurt by the other engines ostracizing him when out of fear that he would replace them, but they soon saw that they were wrong and apologized to him. And Hugo has quite an interesting design. It's like this engine that's propelled by a jet propeller. That's really interesting. I've never seen an engine that looks like this before this. And so far he's only had 2 episodes to himself, so I'm hoping that they develop his personality because he looks very interesting. There's Bradford, an officious and strict brakeman who adheres to every railway rule, no matter how minor the rule might be. Although he means well and does his best to keep the trucks in order, his overzealous attitude makes his trains commonly run very late. Because of this, the engines find him annoying. He is also quite conceited, as he claimed he knew how much the engines appreciated him. And this was the first time in a while we've seen a brakeman with a face in the show since the Spiteful brakeman from Series 2. And he sort of puts me in mind of those old army generals that you see in like wartime films or wartime comedy shows. And I know I've said this a lot about a lot of the new characters, but I think it would be great to see him again because he's very entertaining. And this series had a lot more time devoted to some of the classic characters, including Duck, Oliver, Toad, Donald, Douglas, and Daisy the Diesel Railcar.
It's obvious that the writers they got for these episodes in this series obviously loved some of the new old characters that they brought back and wanted to show that love in these episodes they wrote.
And the episode Love Me Tender was a great way to introduce Donald and Douglas to the show. And the episode kind of reminds me of Twin Trouble from Series 6, where the two get in a little squabble with each other. And it's really nice to see them again after so many years. And this episode is also a callback to them being really good in the snow in The Deputation. They also brought back Daisy the Diesel Railcar, who was hinted to be in part of the show since Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure. And one interesting thing to note about this character is the fact that in Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure she was temporarily voiced by Teresa Gallagher, but for the rest of the series she was voiced by Tracy Ann Oberman, who a lot of people may remember from Doctor Who as Yvonne Hartman, the original founder of the Torchwood Institute. And her episodes just had so many great callbacks to the character she was when she was introduced in Series 2, being hard to please, vain, lazy, stubborn, afraid of cows and balls, and always using her fitter as an excuse to get out of work.
This series has had one writer writing for all the Daisy related episodes, and it shows that this guy really knows the character Daisy is.
And Tracy Ann just does a terrific voice as her. I mean, when I first heard Tracy Ann as Daisy, I honestly didn't recognise her. It's like this posh upper class voice that she gives. It's just so damn amazing.
Early mornings are bad for my swerves. I'll just have 10 minutes more. Oh.
And I'm really glad that she had more than just one episode in this series. I also love the episode The Railcar and the Coaches, where she shows herself with Hanny and Clarabelle. And it shows that not everybody on Sodor gets along with each other. And as I said, it's a great way to bring Daisy back, and I really hope that they show more of her in the future. And speaking of comebacks, they also bring back Glyn the coffee pot engine from The Adventure Begins, who was repaired and now works at Ulster Castle with Stephen and Millie. They also bring back Judy and Jerome, the breakdown train from The Adventure Begins, and make them a permanent team on the railway where Ryan and Daisy work. It was really great to see these other characters after so long, and it really developed their personalities more. The series also brought in the small railway engines since Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, Rex, Bert and Mike. And this was also the first time since Series 4 that a TV series stories were based off of stories from the Railway series.
Holy crap, since they were brought in Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure, this was just amazing. We haven't had an episode based on the Railway series since Series 4, so this was a huge step up for this TV series.
It was just really great to see Railway series stories being put into the TV series for the first time since Series 4. Even though it would have been a little awesome to see them introduced in the model series, I have this theory about why they didn't introduce them in the model series. I've heard from many resources that the studio had a hard enough time working with the narrow gauge engine models, so it would have been impossible for them to have made miniature models of the small railway engines that worked in the same functions, and this was part of the reasons they upscaled the narrow gauge engines to larger models from Series 5 onwards. But because the show is CG now, anything's possible. With the small railway engines, a lot of people may prefer Willie Rushton's narrations of the stories since he did audio narrations of the stories. But I honestly like the voice actors they chose for the characters. They just seem really fitting to me. Mike is voiced by Tim Whitnell in this show. And you may have heard his voice in other children's shows including Rory the Racing Car, Fifi and the Flower Tots, Teletubbies, Treefoo Tom, Mr. Men and Underground Ernie. And he just has a great voice for Mike, sort of like this Irish type accent. Well, I think it's Irish, but correct me if I'm wrong.
If engines can't whistle properly, they shouldn't try. Whistles are very important. Engines without whistles aren't proper engines at all.
And the episodes that I like the most are Sydney Sins, because I find it funny how Sydney tries to make up a song to help him remember jobs. And this is just great development for a character who's very forgetful. Diesel and the Ducklings were kind of funny because it shows Diesel having a soft side when he sees a duck and some ducklings. and it introduces some hilarious duck stares that we see further on in the series.
Seriously, what is it about ducks that's so scary in this series?
Bradford the Brake Band was a great introduction to Bradford the Brake Band. All the Daisy episodes were just top notch in my opinion. Pouty James was another one of my favourite episodes because it shows James being really pouty about not getting to do the jobs that he wants to do. And the way the other engines try to help him forget about hating the jobs and trying to enjoy himself is just really hilarious and adorable. Letters to Santa is another great episode because it focuses on Percy and Harold the Helicopter's relationship. And I swear this cross-face that Percy makes is a callback to the face he made in the classic series. The Christmas Coffee Pot and Over the Hill are very interesting and entertaining episodes because it focuses on Glyn the Coffee Pot engine. Mucking About is quite a funny episode because it focuses on Monty and Max, two characters from the pack. And I don't really have a huge reason for this episode being one of my favourites, I just thought it was funny. Buckled Tracks and Bumpy Trucks was another entertaining episode because it's just so hilarious to see the Fat Controller trying to get rid of his sun hat unsuccessfully. But my three most favourite episodes of this series are Tit for Tat, Mike's Whistle and Useful Railway, because it focuses on the small railway engines and they're the first 3 episodes to be based on a railway series story for the first time since Series 4. And with Tit for Tat, I thought it was great that they actually brought in the fat and thin clergyman, who were actually Wilbert Audrey and another guy that Wilbert used to know. And some would say that these episodes are giving Thomas too much screen time since he wasn't exactly in the stories and the books, but I honestly don't mind that they put Thomas in these episodes. Plus, it was a great way to actually get Thomas to be in a scene with Wilbur Audrey himself. That Andrew Brenner is one clever guy. I've always found Mike's Whistle really funny because it's great to focus on Mike. And Useful Railway was a great wrap-up for this series because it was just a great story to base off of the Railway series. And some people may complain that it didn't use the Ballast story from the book. But I personally don't mind that because they sort of did references to it in Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure with the way they introduced the 3 railway engines. And I bet you all expected me to complain about Rosie not getting any screen time in this series. But no, not even going to bother. It's not worth it. Yeah, seriously, I'm not even going to bother. Since she obviously returned in Series 21, there's no point in me bothering to complain about it. So I'm not going to do it.
I know I keep saying this about every series that's come out since Andrew Brenner's been writing them, but each series is just getting better and better every year.
So Series 20 of Thomas and Friends is definite proof that Andrew Brenner is the right person to handle the show. It's got entertaining stories, great new characters, many welcomed returns, and the CG is just top notch as always since Andrew Brenner took over. And now we wrap up Thomascember 2017 with Journey Beyond Sodor, the CGI animated musical adventure based on the television show Thomas and Friends based on the Railway series by the Reverend W. Audrey. This movie stars a whole cast of great celebrities and deals with many traits that children have, such as autism, through the experimenter engines.
So what's this feature-length special like compared to the previous feature-length special? Well, let's go full steam ahead and find out.
On his way to deliver a goods train to Bridlington goods yard in the mainland, Henry suffers a crash at Vickerstown station from a faulty signal has been taken to the steamworks for repair. Meanwhile, Thomas is fed up with James's constant boasting and is upset that the Fat Controller chooses him to take Henry's goods train to the mainland. So much so that Thomas decides to arrive at Vickerstown before James so he could take the train to Bridlington himself. However, due to the troublesome trucks distracting him, Thomas gets lost on the mainland and comes across many different characters including Beresford the Crane, Lexi and Theo the failed experimenter engines, Hurricane and Frankie who work at the steelworks, and Merlin, a third experimenter engine who believes that he has invisibility powers. Hurricane and Frankie friendly invite Thomas to stay with them and offer to take his goods train to Bridlington for them. The next morning, after delivering his train to Bridlington the night before, Frankie convinces him to stay and help them as a favour. However, they refuse to let Thomas leave, so Thomas tries to escape and befriends the experimental engines with help to get him back to Sodor. And they also have to save James, who came to the mainland to find Thomas after he'd been gone for a few days and had also been taken prisoner by Frankie and Hurricane. and the whole adventure is full of musical numbers, surprises, new friends, and new enemies. Story-wise, this special is better than The Great Race in my opinion. It just has a better story, and it has lots more songs compared to The Great Race.
Journey Beyond Sodor definitely has a better story than The Great Race, but there's just some things about it that seem odd to me.
But before I go into great details about other things in this special, let's talk about the new characters that they introduced. There's Lexi, voiced by Lucy Montgomery, who is a cab-followed engine. She's an ego and excitable engine. She is proud of being experimental and cab-forward, even though she is convinced this makes her an unuseful engine. She's upbeat, cheerful and outgoing, and likes to experiment with how she presents herself, often trying out different voices and how she phrases her expressions just to see which one she thinks works best. Lexi is not always confident, she gets things right, but she loves the excitement of anything new, is very sociable and keen to explore new things. Out of all the new characters in this special, I find her the most entertaining, and whenever she speaks you could tell that Lucy Montgomery was just having a friggin' blast voicing this character, especially how she gets to try out various voices. And I'm honestly hoping that they give her more screen time in the future, like perhaps giving her some screen time in the Big World Big Adventure spin-off that's soon to come out. There's Theo, an experimental railway traction engine who is very shy, extremely cautious and highly awkward. He has an unusual experimental drive system that does not always function the way it should. He finds it particularly difficult when going in reverse. This of course only undermines Theo's confidence, and he firmly believes that he cannot do anything, although this is not entirely true. Theo is quite thoughtful, but when he speaks he is usually direct and to the point, and sometimes blunt. This guy can be described by some people as a nervous wreck, and it's said that Theo displays personality traits of autism, making him the first Thomas and Friends character with a disability. And when I look at this guy, I just kind of think of Fergus, the traction engine from Series 7. But it is a very interesting design that makes him different from Fergus. And there's Merlin, voiced by Hugh Bonneville, who sees himself as a hero. He is proud and confident of his abilities, in particularly his special skill, the ability to make himself invisible. All he has to do is say invisibility on and shut his eyes and is convinced that nobody can see him. He knows he was specially designed in order to be hard to see, and his 3 funnels are the proof of that. And a lot of the fans were really disappointed that Merlin didn't get as much screen time as the other experimental engines, since he was in all the advertisements and all the posters of this special. So it's a real damn shame that this character didn't get a huge amount of screen time like Lexi and Theo did, experimental engine wise. But nevertheless, I really like this character. He just looks like he could be really fun to be around. And it's said that his design is based off of a wartime steam locomotive that was built to hide himself with steam during the war bombing, which could be the reason for his belief that he can turn invisible. And there's Beresford, a crane who is usually very lonely, having no one to talk to, with engines often passing through with other work. His rather aggressive way of getting to know new engines makes it hard for him to make friends, as shown by him dropping a fishing boat in front of Thomas and slinging Thomas up with his hook in a later encounter. But he's well-meaning, though jealous of the freedom engines have to go anywhere. And what I love most about this character is that he's based off of a rolling crane railway that's located in Bristol Harbour, where I live. And I will say that he's honestly not the strongest new character in this special, as he's really there as an obstacle for Thomas to meet and get past. But the way he speaks when he first encounters Thomas kind of puts me in mind of that caterpillar from Disney's Alice in Wonderland who keeps asking Alice who she is. And this guy does it in the same way. So not exactly a very interesting character, but a great obstacle for Thomas. Then there's the villain of the film, Frankie, a charming and intelligent diesel shunter who could be very demanding. A natural leader, Frankie actively takes charge of operations at the steelworks. She could be scheming at times, putting on the front to try and manipulate others into doing what she wants them to do. Frankie, however, is not mean at heart. She feels hard done by and rejected because there is more work to do at the steelworks than there are engines to do it. She would love to be free to go off making deliveries with Hurricane, but feels the only way she will ever be able to achieve this is by tricking others into doing the work she doesn't want to do. She's one of those characters who seems really nasty on the outside, but is really nice on the inside. Which makes quite a different villain from the previous villains of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends in the specials, like Diesel 10 and Sailor John and so on and so forth. She's really nice but has devious ways of doing what she wants to do. And her schemes are joined by Hurricane, a very big tank engine with 10 wheels, making him probably the biggest tank engine ever, almost as big as Gordon. But Hurricane is also a big softy. Although his name sounds like a storm, Hurricane is gentle, level-headed and kind. He is happy to see Thomas and treats him from the start like a new friend. He is however very loyal to Frankie and follows her lead, trying his best to keep up with her plans and help her realise her schemes. Hurricane turns a bit of a blind eye to the mean side of Frankie, preferring instead to see her as a loyal companion. He is hard-working, easygoing, generally cheery, and his kindness cannot help but show through. And I've got to be honest, the first time I looked at this guy in the movie, I could tell that there was something going on with him, especially with that face he makes with those nasty-looking eyebrows. But compared to Frankie, he does seem to be nicer to Thomas when they first meet. And during the film's climax, he actually saves Thomas at the end. This just shows how much of a nice guy Hurricane really is on the inside.
The villains of this film are really the only new characters to get really big developments. But all the other new characters are pretty entertaining, and it would be nice to see them again more often in the show.
And this special has so many musical numbers in it. Like Somebody Has to Be the Favourite, showing off James's vanity, Who's Thomas, which introduces Brailsford and has the truck singing along with Thomas and Brailsford. The Hottest Place in Town, which is honestly my favourite and most catchy song in the whole special. I Want to Go Home, which is basically the sad musical number in the film that you'd expect. We Can't Do Anything, which is basically the experimental engines thinking that they can't do anything and Thomas trying to convince them that they can. And the most important thing is Being Friends, which is basically Thomas and James making up for their little quarrel during the special. And out of all the songs, The Hottest Place in Town is honestly my favourite one. It's just the most catchy out of all of them. And I love how it's used by Frankie and Hurricane to manipulate Thomas into staying at the steelworks and help them out. And they try and use it again on James, but James hilariously interrupts their singing and stops them in their tracks. And this special also saw the brief return of Rosie, voiced by Nicola Stapleton. And this wasn't exactly her official return in the series, since that was actually in Series 21, which explains why she got painted red. But I really love the exchange she has with James in the film. And even though it's a small amount of screen time, it's just really great to hear her talking again. And I love her red paint job in this. It really makes her the first engine to have a Northwestern Railway initials painted on her.
Ever since they announced Rosie's return, I was all hyped up, ready to see her in action again. And even though she only got one speaking role in this movie, it's just really nice to hear her talk again after all these years.
And yeah, let's talk about the infamous bouncing of the engines throughout this special.
When I first saw some clips of the engines bouncing in this movie, I honestly thought they were just going to save it for the musical numbers. Sort of like how they had those wild and imaginative backgrounds like they did in Lost Treasure and The Great Race. But nope, they just had to have the characters bouncing every 5 fucking seconds in this movie.
Now most people hate this because it's really unrealistic for the characters, since they didn't bounce at all in the original series or the series before this special. Now some people can get over the bouncing because of the entertaining story and characters, but for most people it is really distracting. And I'm one of those who's sort of in the middle. Enjoys the story but finds the bouncing really distracting.
I swear to God, the more times I see the engines bouncing every like 5 seconds, it just puts me in mind of Chuggington.
But I will admit, the troublesome trucks bouncing during the Who's Thomas musical number is quite funny in my opinion. So yeah, the bouncing can be really distracting, but if you could get over that, you're really going to like this special. And there's also the fact that Bridlington Goods Yard looks nothing like the Bridlington Goods Yard in the real world. A minor flaw, but it can be really distracting, especially when you know your railway yards.
So if you could get past all the bouncing and whatnot that the engines do every like 5 seconds, this is a decent special. I just don't think it's really as good as some of the other feature-length specials I've seen in the past, especially when you compare it to Lost Treasure.
So despite the bouncing problems that most people have, Journey Beyond Sodor is a really well written and entertaining special. It's got great new characters, great musical numbers, and it's just great to see Thomas mostly on the mainland for the most of the special. And if you haven't seen this special yet, I highly recommend checking it out. It's really entertaining, especially when you could get past all the bouncing that's really unrealistic. And that's the end of Thomascember 2017. It's been a real pleasure going through Series 20 and Journey Beyond Sodor, and not so much of a pleasure going on with Series 8 into 12. But I hope you guys liked it, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas.